Hello everyone, Azortharion here. I wanted to make a video going over everything you need to know about PvE hunter pets in patch 11.1 and beyond, including which pet is best for pure DPS and when to use different pets for different situations. I'll also touch on PvP briefly, though I'll admit I'm more of a PvE specialist. Going into patch 11.1, the biggest change is that any pet can now take any pet specialization. Your spirit beast that used to be locked into tenacity can now be cunning or ferocity, and the same goes for every other pet family. To change your pet spec, just visit any stable master or use the interdimensional companion repository item from the auction house, which acts like a portable stable. Because of this, the only meaningful difference between pets now are their unique family-specific abilities and any exotic abilities they might have, like the spirit beast's spirit mend. Before we discuss which pets to pick, here's a quick background on how hunter pets work. If you're already familiar with the basics, feel free to skip ahead using the chapters below, but for newer players, I think a brief primer is helpful. There are 3 pet specializations: tenacity, ferocity, and cunning. Any pet can be any spec. Tenacity grants 5% max health and a 2-minute defensive cooldown called Fortitude of the Bear, which increases your current and max HP by 20% for 8 seconds. Ferocity gives you access to the group-wide buff Bloodlust, which every competitive PvE group needs at least one of. And it also provides 4% Leech, which causes you to heal yourself for 4% of all damage you deal. It's worth noting that this is separate between your pet and yourself, so your pet will heal itself for 4% of the damage it deals, while you will do the same with your abilities. Cunning pets grant you 8% increased movement speed and Master's Call, which is a 45-second cooldown that frees an ally from movement impairing effects like slows, snares and roots, and you also get 4 seconds of immunity from such effects. Again, any pet can be any spec, and you can swap pet specs at a stable master or with the interdimensional companion repository. In addition to the specs, there are 7 pet family abilities called Defense, Dodge, Magic Defense, Mortal Wounds, Dispel, Slow, and Trigger Defense. So, Defense is a 1-minute cooldown that reduces your pet's damage taken by 50% for 12 seconds. Dodge is a 1.5-minute cooldown that increases your pet's dodge chance by 30% for 20 seconds. Magic Defense is a 1.5-minute cooldown that reduces your pet's magic damage taken by 70% for 8 seconds. Mortal Wounds causes your pet's target to receive 50% less healing. Dispel is a 10-second cooldown that lets your pet dispel 1 disease, magic, and poison effect from itself. Slow reduces your pet's movement speed by 50% for 6 seconds on a 10-second cooldown. Triggered Defense gives your pet 60% reduced damage taken for 15 seconds when it drops below 40% health, but this can only trigger once every 120 seconds. Meanwhile, Beast Mastery Hunters can use certain exotic pets that have extra special abilities in addition to their family traits, and their usefulness varies quite a bit. So now that we've covered the basics, what pet should we use? Well, Beast Mastery Hunters looking for pure DPS should use an Akiri pet. They're these buggy looking creatures found in many areas of the world. And while Akiri pets don't inherently do more damage, they have 30% increased movement speed via Dune Strider, which helps them reach bosses more quickly, especially in fights where the boss moves or teleports, leading to more overall DPS. Since Akiris can now be tenacity, there's almost no reason not to use one in almost every PvE situation as Beast Mastery, unless you specifically need Bloodlust. In that case, you can just bring another Ferocity Akiri pet if you don't want to swap specs at the Stable Master every time. Akiri pets also have a 50% slow that lasts 6 seconds on a 10-second cooldown, but I actually recommend disabling this unless you really need it, as the slow can be disruptive in Mythic Plus when your tank is trying to group mobs tightly. An honorable mention also goes out to PTERRORDAXES, which offers a toggleable slow fall via the updraft ability. This extends the distance of your disengage and your jumps. and you'll probably either love it or hate it, depending on how well you're used to the normal disengage distance. You toggle the effect by casting Updraft from your pet's spellbook, and you can macro it into disengage. You could also macro a cancel aura Updraft into other abilities so that you're not always floating away. If you do this, if you do macro it into disengage, you'll want to make sure that you type /use Updraft open parenthesis exotic ability close parenthesis into your disengage. Whereas when you want to cancel aura it, you can just have a macro line that's like this, cancel aura Updraft, and you might macro that into your other abilities. By the way, here's a quick demonstration of how it looks when you use this extended disengage. You can see how extra long I flew there. So, for open world content, leveling, delves, and soloing, I instead recommend using a Ferocity Cleft Hoof. So, Cleft Hoofs have a passive that increases their armor by 10% and increases the effectiveness of all healing they receive by 20%. This means that your pet will gain even more benefit from Ferocity's Leech, and they'll take reduced physical damage, which is what most enemies deal in solo content. Spirit Beasts also have Spirit Mend, but it's a very minor heal nowadays, and if you leave it on autocast, it'll often target something irrelevant. It also consumes a little bit of pet focus, slightly reducing your overall DPS, though the impact is minimal. In most situations, it's not going to outperform an Akiri. You might notice some pets have special damaging abilities, for example the Chimera's Froststorm Breath. Now this sounds great on paper, but while the pet is channeling that breath, it's not using its regular attacks, resulting in a net DPS loss. One more note for Beast Mastery pets. There's a little bit more to pet min-maxing than just picking one pet. When you use your 2-minute cooldown, Call of the Wild, it summons 2 of your active pets. The game picks whichever 2 call pet slots aren't currently in use among the first 3. So, if you're using pet 4, the cooldown summons pets from slots 1 and 2. If you're using pet 1, it'll summon slots 2 and 3, and so on. While Call of the Wild is active, you gain the passive benefits of those pets' specs. For example, if you're using a Cunning pet, but one of your other active slots is Tenacity among the first 3, then you will actually gain that 5% max HP from Tenacity for 20 seconds. You also get Ferocity's Leech, though that is mostly only useful for your pet as we talked about earlier, and Cunning's movement speed. So to optimize this, you want your first 3 call pet slots to be 3 different pet specs. I'd arrange them as Tenacity, Cunning, and Ferocity in that order, because Ferocity's Leech isn't that helpful for BM. So in summary for BM, use an Akiri pet for pure DPS, or PTERRORDAXES for extended disengages, and keep a Spirit Beast around if you want a tiny bit of extra healing. The difference an Akiri makes isn't huge on most encounters, but it can be noticeable when target swapping or chasing a highly mobile boss. Unfortunately, Akiri pets are exotic, so other pet specs can't use them. Survival and Marksmanship hunters, when Marksmanship hunters do use pets, can run almost any pet they like in PvE, so long as they pick Tenacity by default. If you need Bloodlust, bring a Ferocity pet. Keeping a Cunning pet handy is also good if you need Master's Call, or if you just want extra movement speed while farming old content. On Marksmanship, Blizzard returned the option to use a pet via a choice node with improved Spotter's Mark. So, it's still a DPS loss to use a pet just like it was when we used a Lone Wolf, at least for series PvE, but it can serve as a makeshift tank for solo content or delves, which might be worth it if you don't mind sacrificing a little bit of damage. There are also a few extra things to consider. For instance, maybe you want the smallest pet possible. So, for example, check out this pet that I've got right here. So take a look at this Marsh Gulper. It's a tiny frog, and the mob is called Marsh Gulper, and you can find it in Tanaan Jungle. It's almost invisible when you're not really looking for it, and it can help reduce visual clutter for melee players in your group. You might also need specific family abilities for certain encounters. So, some pets can reduce their own damage taken, dodge more attacks, dispel themselves, or slow enemies. However, the dodge and dispel abilities are rarely needed in PvE. The defensive cooldown can be useful for pet taunting tricks in Mythic Plus, where you macro your pet's taunt together with that defensive to help your tank manage a big hit. Mortal Wounds, healing reduction pets, are also handy if your group lacks this debuff and if you're facing enemies that heal themselves. Slows are mostly for PvP and can even be disruptive in PvE if they split up enemy mobs. So, if you're wondering where to get all these pets, check out wow-petopia.com. It's been around forever and is hands down the best hunter pet resource out there. Just look up the family you're interested in. I'd recommend going to talents and skills and then family abilities. And Petopia will show you every tameable version of that family and where to find them. So, you know, if you want to go grab an Akiri like I'm recommending here, then you would just scroll down to find Akiri. And you can see every possible Akiri in the game. And if you click each individual one, you can see where you can tame them. So, to wrap it up, for Beast Mastery, grab an Akiri pet if you want maximum DPS, or use a PTERRORDAXES for longer disengages. Keep a Spirit Beast around if you want a tiny bit of extra healing, but don't expect too much from it. And you should also arrange your first free call pet slots via your stables in the order of Tenacity, Cunning, and Ferocity in that order. So, so obviously this should be Tenacity, and then Cunning, and then Ferocity is what you want these pets to be, whatever they happen to be. It doesn't really matter what pets you have in these free slots. What really matters is the spec that you've set up for them. So, stick for the most part, you stick to Tenacity, but you switch to Ferocity when your group needs a Bloodlust, and you only really use Cunning either for some PvP scenarios, or if you're doing old content where you cannot mount, and the extra movement speed is a bit of a quality of life thing. For survival and marksmanship, any pet family works fine for the most part, although Mortal Wounds pet can be a DPS increase in niche healing reduction scenarios on certain enemies. Defense pets can also help with pet taunting in Mythic Plus, and while competitive marksmanship shouldn't use a pet at all, it is valid to use a pet in casual solo content, or if you just love having your pet companion. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and what I do here, please consider subscribing. And you can also check out my Patreon for perks like my Hunter UI and Regars, one-on-one Discord coaching, log and gameplay reviews, plus access to a collection of guides and review videos I've made for other hunters and patrons. Until next time, happy hunting and have a wonderful day. Peace.